Recording. All right, and Stephen K. Peeples here with Marty Jourard of the Motels, and we're going to talk about the band's first album, which was released by Capitol in 1979. So Marty, if we could pick it up with getting signed, because the sessions for the first album literally happened within a few days after the contract was signed. So please pick it up with getting signed and let us know how the first sessions got started.
Sure, you're right. It was a really kind of streamlined process, which shocked us as much as other people. They go, "You mean you got signed and you're already recording like 2 days later?" But the Capitol had seen us play, and other record labels had seen us play many times, so they knew what they were getting in terms of a band that could play all at the same time and make songs. So Carter was the producer, staff producer at Capitol, was a huge part of us getting signed to Capitol. And Milt Olin, this attorney that befriended us at Wong, said, "I think I can do this and help you get a deal." And it brings you a lot of credit when you have a powerful entertainment attorney on your side, and Milt was. So in looking at my diary here, or my journal, whatever you want to call it, we were playing the Whiskey opening for Dirk Hamilton, Wong's with the No, Wong's with Dirk Hamilton. So we signed May 12th, which is a Saturday, to Capitol Records. And then Sunday was Mother's Day, so that we just loved our moms. But it was not the next day, it was the day after we got signed that we started recording, and that was at Sunset Sound, which is a legendary studio, but it didn't have a particular sound. Sunset Sound was like a blank piece of paper. The Doobie Brothers recorded there, and Van Halen recorded there, and it wasn't one of those studios like Stax Records or Motown that had a distinctive sound. So we went in there, and it was just the sound of our band with microphones in front of it. And the first thing we recorded was Route 66, and that's not the one that names all the cities on Route 66, but it's the theme song to that 60s television show that for some reason, I think Nelson Riddle.
Right, not Bobby Troop, Nelson Riddle.
Yeah, it's an instrumental. So that's the first thing we recorded because we opened our sets with it. But to bring us to not go on too long, we recorded for 2 weeks, and that was it. We did the basics in 2 weeks. It was from Monday to basically another Monday, and then through the weekend. I'm looking here. And then in June, keyboard overdubs, and then we tried to cut some song, and we got mad and didn't work.
What was that? Which one was that?
People, Places, and Things. See, it's important to understand that I recorded in a jingle studio in Atlanta in like 1973. Nobody in the band had recorded in a full-on major studio before. So what Carter did was put us at ease more than come up with these brilliant ideas for strings or overdubs or all of that. And we needed that. We were very secure in our material because we've been playing it to death. But in terms of going into a studio, it's a whole nother thing, as any musician will tell you. It's a skill that session players have, and other players may have or may not, but probably don't, because the studio is a whole nother thing. And it says Mixed Atomic Cafe, June 22nd, Mixed Dressing Up at Total Control the 24th. I went to the beach for 2 weeks back in Florida, where I grew up. Then we rehearsed at this place called Mars Rehearsal Studio, somewhere in Hollywood.
Yes.
And then we played our first gig as a band that was signed. We went to Riverside, and we opened, or the Cats opened for us, I guess. The Cats was a local band that had played a lot with us. Then we mixed the record, or Warren Dewey did, in the end of July, and we shot the album cover, which is a pretty hilarious story in itself.
Yeah, I want to get the story about the album cover for sure.
Yeah, okay, it was kind of just hilarious, really. Album cover, yeah, that was July 30th. So this motel, this is the card for it. And it was a Riviera Motel. It was on Sunset, 6757 Sunset. And Martha, we were looking for motels cards. We went all over Hollywood getting their free cards they had in the lobbies. And this is the one. And we wanted this to be the cover. Just this actual postcard with this hilarious lady on it, and then have a black background or something. Well, the legal people at Capitol said, no, if you do that, this woman is going to show up, out of the blue and say, you didn't get permission, you didn't get a release. So we've got to recreate it. So they got Elliot Gilbert, who shot the first Cars album, the one with that beautiful gal with the steering wheel, hired him to shoot this. And as you can tell, it's about as close as you can get. I mean, they obviously went to it's the same hotel. We went to the Riviera.
Right.
They set it up exactly right. And they got this woman, they oiled her all up with her wrinkles and, suntan lotion. We call her Chlorina.
Well, she's fairly typical of the elderly Miami Beach habitué.
Yeah.
The leathery, dark leatherette skin.
That's right. And the bleach blonde and everything. And we rented a room, so we could do it. And then they used to do this. They used to have dust jackets with cool art on it.
Yeah.
Every one of us in whatever room that was, just kind of lurking out, and then they doubled it. The joke of that is that we did it, we recreated it because we didn't want to have any lawsuits with that woman. But what happened is when Capitol promoted the album, they put it on a huge billboard somewhere. And she was, of course, on the front of that. And then she got in touch with Capitol and said, you didn't have my permission. So they had to do some settlement with her because, it's kind of ironic.
Yeah, she gave permission for the album cover, but not for the billboard.
Oh, she got paid for the album cover. She didn't get paid for the billboard.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right.
So that happened. And it was, these are, as I said before, heady times.
Well, let's go back to the sessions. I want to dive back into the sessions a little bit more.
Well,
because, it was basically, as he said, the band playing their sets live with microphones set up, and Carter trying to put you guys at ease so that you wouldn't feel nervous and blow the takes because you were just like nervous, not because you couldn't play the song or whatever. But
Carter's idea of producing would be lowering the lights if they were too bright, say try it again, or order out for pizza. It sounds a little touchy-feely, but there's so many ways to produce a record, as you know. And we basically, we weren't children, but we needed that guidance. And he made many records, with Capitol, and he knew the studio. He'd made a lot of records there. But we just blazed through it. I think a lot of the times you play everything too fast because you're so jazzed that you're in a studio and you're doing it. And I told you in a previous interview, there's always the proper tempo for every song.
Right.
Adrenaline will pump it up 20%. But with a few re-recordings of songs, we didn't have any new material. We just wanted to lay that all out because that was, I guess you could say, it was a lifetime of Martha's material, and then some co-writes with Jeff. I do remember one really funny thing that taught me something about feel. We needed to overdub real piano on Horn Reggae. Horn Reggae was this reggae song that had this double time chorus, and Carter told me to come in, says come on in 10 in the morning, which is hilarious for a musician. So I go in there and I'm either hungover or just tired, and I sit at this grand piano. And he rolls a tape, and I go, all right, I'm going to get the feel for this. I'm going to just figure out what to do when we really do a take.
Right.
I go all the way through it. I'm just going, if you hear it, you'll just hear this guy going, blah. So I said, all right, I'm ready to do it. He goes, we got it. See you tomorrow. It was like 10:15 a.m. And because I didn't think it was really a keeper, and this is back to being nervous or not, it's just what he wanted, this barrel house kind of piano playing. And that was something cool.
He wanted you to play it without thinking about it, I think. So he had you do it while you were in a fog and still asleep. That was right. Brilliant producing strategy.
It is. It was really hip. Actually, Tom Petty did the same thing I played on this song called Mary's New Car. that was on Southern accents. And Petty had just gotten a studio in his home. He was real excited. So he decided to cut a track, any track. And it was about this, his secretary at Shelter got a new car. So he had a song called Barry's New Car. And I came down with my saxophones and my alto, and I got the headphones on. He's going, all right, we'll roll it. And I'm the same thing. I'm figuring out what key it's in, and I'm just screwing around. And at the end, he said, well, that's it. I go, well, when are we going to take it? And he goes, that's it. Now, later we overdubbed some horn sections, tenors and baritones. But it's a big lesson about feel in that.
Yeah,
I'm not sure exactly what it is, but he also told me, Petty told me later, he had all these top session guys come in, which, no problem. And they were too good. It didn't sound right. So I guess you can take that with a grain of salt as a sax player, but they probably approach it much more seriously, but it was just a goof for me. So we did that. Then we got into mixing. June mixed Atomic Cafe, mixed this, mixed that. Then we rehearsed a whole bunch. They did the mixes in July. Then we played some shows in San Diego, the Catamaran, the Palomino, Wong's. Oh, we played a gig in Oakland with the Tubes. Now, this is very politically incorrect now, but it was Pearl Harbor and the Explosions was one of the bands. It's the Tubes, the Pearl Harbor and the Explosions and the Motels. And then we just, we went back east, the first time we'd really toured. And the first gig we played was Amityville, which is where they filmed the Amityville Horror.
Right,
and
right,
it was
right.
this weird club where we called the gig a Amityville Horror because in order to get to the stage, there's a hatch behind the amplifier line and a ladder that went down to this basement that was, having, I think I saw a rat and it had pools of water. But this is our introduction to touring out of Southern California. We had not played outside of Southern California. So we played Amityville, Philadelphia, Boston at the Rat, and I did see a rat in the parking lot there. Then we played El Mocambo, New York City. We flew back. Then we went to Europe, which is a whole nother story, but that's not about making the record. That's just going out.
No, let's rewind a little bit. I want to go back to the sessions because you're talking about feel and a great story about feel. I remember it brings to mind a video that I saw of Walter Becker and Donald Fagen deconstructing one of their great songs, and they talked about how they had brought in pretty much every great session guitarist in town to try to nail this part. And a lot of them, it was technically great. They were just like blazing solos, but then there was just this one that had just the right feel and the right groove for the song, and that's the one that they chose. And I'm forgetting the guy's name, I'm sorry, but he was the one who nailed it. And it was largely because of the feel along with the technical fabulosity.
Yeah, it was Jay Graydon, I think.
Jay Graydon, yes.
So they had, they can get anybody they want. Lee Ritenour, I mean, on and on it goes. I'm a big Steely Dan fan.
Well, were there any takes that, or any songs or any tracks that you nailed on the first take? On the first album?
This is long ago. There might have been. I just remember doing overdubs and trying to figure out how do you have feel on an overdub when the band isn't playing anymore. That's where recording gets kind of mysterious. Now, today, there is no band playing all at the same time. It's all many times digital and just all done on Pro Tools.
Right.
And there's nobody else in the room. I remember I really had worked out the solo to Total Control so many times. That thing did not come full blown at all. It went through many phases that were not very good. And in fact, if you listen to what's going on in the back, we didn't even think it should have a sax solo. I'm playing all this synth, this polymoog and sort of stringy stuff. It's just got a few chords. And then Carter said, let's add some sax. I'm pretty sure how that worked, but by then I'd worked it out. And I just had decided, okay, it's going to start out real dreamy, and then I'm going to get kind of R&B in the second half. and when in doubt, go for that high note. And so that's how that worked. But we just all went 1, 2, 3, 4, and just hit it. And you just do it over and over again. And eventually we got it. There were some songs that didn't make it. There's a song called Boys that we used to play. It was the second one. We'd open up our set with Route 66 and Boys, that Martha wrote it. It was a great song. I have a piece of it here. I actually have the whole thing. It was on an album called Anthology Land.
Right.
But it just shows you that these were all carefully arranged. It wasn't jamming. It wasn't just play some licks everywhere. My brother, Jeff, his guitar playing was very specific, and we do things together, as you know, harmonies. And I could get almost the same sound on a polymoog as he got on his guitar. So you could get these, you weren't quite sure what you were hearing if you play in unison, which is a great thing because it's a sound of an instrument that doesn't exist. It's two instruments playing the same note at the same time, but they have different timbres, so you get a new sound.
It's like twin fiddles or twin guitars, but different.
Right. Well, it's like two different instruments playing the same pitch. So that instrument doesn't exist, but we were always trying to come up with novel sounds. And sometimes it was just a combination of two instruments playing at the same time.
Well, I want to jump back to Total Control because, in your live sets, that was a tour de force. That like usually raised the roof on whatever venue you were performing in. And how difficult was it to translate that kind of energy that you would get from the audience in the studio when you were recording the same songs? That must have been a bit of a challenge.
The challenge was to play it exactly on time. Now, that song started out as a punk song. Martha's talked about this before.
Yeah.
She wrote it like looking counterclockwise, knowing what could happen. It was like a punk song. And when Jeff came along, he said, what if we slow it way down? He had heard this song called Panic in the World by XTC maybe, or some band. And it was a bump, 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 bump. It was super, well, slower, but it was also, it didn't speed up. It just went bump, bump like a metronome. So the way we recorded it, and you can hear it, we didn't do it that way when Jeff wasn't in the band anymore. But to do that, it's just bump, 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 like all the way through, not one dropped eighth note. So there's that, it almost sounds like a drum machine, but it's just very carefully played. So when it bursts out into the sax solo and there's the strings, it's a huge release from that, because otherwise it just like it's click, 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 but very much on purpose. So it's the contrast to those two that probably,
it's the tension and release of the performance in live sets, I think, that really drives people nuts. And I think you guys really did get that in the studio, that same kind of dynamic on that track.
Yeah, I wish, I won't say I wish, but it was so long ago, I can't tell you the details, but we knew we had it when we got it, like when I finally played that solo. But it went through so many iterations. At one point I was playing it on alto at Wong's. My brother told me to just restate the melody and do it real clipped, like that. I should have just said no. So I played it that way once, and we got a review that said, Marty Jourard's lighthearted, frivolous solo ruined the mood entirely. So I did it that way. But live and learn. And that solo, I get a lot of credit for that one. And it was heartfelt, I mean, I got into those notes. I would think of my father who had passed away in the 70s. Sometimes when I hit the high note, you just kind of get that, it's like a cry, that high note, and you can put a lot into it. To me, a saxophone is a voice. Basically, a saxophone player is singing.
Right.
If they're not just a note meister, like, but the only difference is you're using a bamboo reed instead of vocal cords. Otherwise, you're using air like a singer. You're using your body, your breath to make the sound, and all the phrasing. The same thing. You can do many vibrato like a singer. All these different things. So it is essentially like singing. And I sang in bands back in Florida and in LA. So the most beautiful instrument is the human voice. I think all instruments attempt to approach that immediate communication. When you hear somebody sing, and it'll just sometimes just get to your heart with no processes. And saxophone, especially tenor, it sounds like a voice. And I don't intellectually approach it that way, but I know that I feel that's what people are responding to when they hear a good saxophone solo. It's the closest you can come to singing and have the same general timbre. Like you don't hear a lot of emotionally riveting piccolo solos, maybe trumpet or something, but the saxophone is just something about it that.
No, you don't use piccolo when you're going for emotion.
Yeah, I mean, somebody called Miles Davis. So it was Gil Evans. He goes, Miles Davis, he's a great singer of songs. He didn't say anything about his trumpet playing. He's a great singer of songs.
Well, let's go through some of the other tracks on the album.
Okay, sure.
Let me know, some of the interesting things that might have happened during the sessions.
Yes, I'll try and be interesting. Anticipating first song, just a song Martha did. We pretty much played it straight. There was nothing dramatic about it. I mean, it was arranged. Kicks, Martha was doing a riff on Kids. What's got into these kids today from what was that Music Man?
Yeah.
Yeah, because she would listen to a lot of musicals. Kicks, what's got into these kids today? She even steals that line. And that's a real raver of a song.
Yes.
Remember, same live, it just gets going and going, and then boom, it ends. Total Control, that's still the song we play every time we do a show. And you just hope for something like that. That was the hit. If we did have a hit, this album, I think, only got to 179 on the charts, but in Australia, Total Control was, I guess it was certainly top 5. Love Don't Help, we used to call that track. That was just a funky song. I'm just going, boom, boom, I'm just playing this kind of Ray Charles riff. Then it goes into a release that Jeff plays this crazy solo. It was, I won't say it was a throwaway, but it wasn't a deep track. It's like Martha wrote it and we did it. And it needed something after Total Control that was more upbeat and frivolous, because Total is, it's got a lot of emotion in it.
Yeah.
Lyric.
You got it.
Yeah. Closets and Bullets. This is when I got this keyboard called a Prophet, and the Prophet 5 is a sound of new wave. You can research it. It's PROPHET.
Right. And a V.
Yeah, V meaning 5.
Yep.
And they certainly made a profit on that, because we bought 2 of them. Blew up so much. I think they were $4,000 a piece back then. You always needed a spare, which didn't help because that one would blow up. When
Built-in obsolescence. They took a lesson from American industry.
Well, the design was good, but the execution wasn't. It didn't blow up like an explosion, but it just wouldn't work. And on that, it had this thing that was, you could set the if you hold down a note of it, it would just repeat it in tempo. So whatever the tempo of the song is, on Jeff's lead guitar, in the background, you hear this synth, and I'm just pushing it down, so and we try to match it to the exact tempo of the song.
Right.
A tremolo that's in the same tempo of the song. We play that live now. We play 5 songs off this album live usually, and there's only 10 songs on the album, so we play half of this album. We'll be playing it, at the Cruel World Fest and wherever we play, because people love these songs.
That's pretty amazing. Well, and also you kind of touched on this, because this album was recorded pretty much just at the tail end of the analog, just before the digital revolution, in a way. And there was still a lot of analog kind of experimentation going on in the studio at the point that you were recording this record. And later records, you were able to pull in some like more sophisticated synthesizer technology and so forth. But this first album was still pretty primitive on that score. Yeah,
it was. Now the big deal was the Prophet. Now Polymoog, there've been many Moogs and Oberheims, I guess, other brands. I just went with Moog because it was thrown in my lap when I joined the band.
The price was right. The price was right.
Right. And I played it more like a piano for a while, but then I got into some sounds like Atomic Cafe. There's this harpsichord sound on a Moog that we use a lot, and I try to replicate it. So Atomic Cafe, if you listen to the intro of that, that's a very weird intro. I think Jeff came up with it. It's just going, and it even deceives some other people that have we played with that open for us. They go, "What is that?" And all you're doing is playing 3/4. You're going, and you don't know where's the one.
Where's the one, right?
Yeah, well, it's there. But me and Jeff came up with this harmony. It was just a pretty straight major third harmony. But then it goes da 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 da. And it took me so long to figure out what we'd recorded. A few years ago, we decided to bring it back, and it was weird in a good way.
You had to reverse engineer it so you could figure out how to play it again.
Yeah, it's odd. Jeff goes, I don't know. You figure it out. Celia was just one of those wild lyrics that she did, and that goes over good. We played that as well. When we were rehearsing this, he goes, Celia, da 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 da. And Martha had this note in mind, and she, in the rehearsal, she goes, plink. And it's this weird note you would never go to. It's the one that just comes in after every line. I think it's a sharp 4, but it's the kind of thing that nobody else would come up with that note. It's just this strange, ponderous note of all 12 notes you could choose. I remember that specifically in rehearsal. Horn reggae. Reggae was hot then. I think we were talking about this in another interview. And watching the Detectives off Elvis Costello's first album was very influential.
Yes.
Which is funny because then along came Bob Marley, and it's like, the real deal. But the English were hip to reggae before we were.
Yeah.
Maybe because of Island Records. So in Porn Reggae, I do remember I came up with that little part in the middle. I didn't get credit because it's just a part. But the one goes bum bum ba da da bum 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 bum. It's just a part. We call it a part. It's not a bridge. It's not a lead. It's not a verse. It's not a chorus. It's a part. So if you come up with a good part, you just play the part. And I think we ended it that way as well.
Nice.
Yeah. Dressing Up, that was the first song I ever played anything on when Jeff came down, told me to come down and play that 3-note riff, right, da, da, doubling it on the sax. And then soon after that, I never played it on sax again. I just switched to keyboard. We played it in unison, and there's a brass sound on the Poly Moog. Now, when I say brass, it sounds like a Moog trying to sound like brass. You don't ever mistake it for a true sample. These were not samples.
Right.
Moog had a very warm sound, and so did the Prophet. It was very warm, musical. Even though it was electronic, it had a warm sound. And I remember that song just gets going in the studio, and we did nail that one. And then there's the denouement, wherever you say denouement, after the big climax which is Dressing Up, next to last, then we got Counting, which is a very chilled out song. And I play Fender Rhodes on the end of that very lightly because Martha wasn't a big fan of a Rhodes, but it just sounded like the right part to play, and it just drifts away. Another aspect of that album is, for some reason, Carter decided that it needed kunga songs, kunga.
Little percussion.
Yeah, and he had 2 kunga drums. They're Latin, those big, tall. You've heard them before, Santana. Yes. And this guy overplayed on every track. Just, I guess they wanted their money's worth. And Martha and Jeff listened to it and said no. So there's some on Porn Reggae, but it was laid out, and it just, you don't do that to a band and suddenly be like having a mariachi band in the background on every song. That was never there when we were signed. So there's very discreet touches here and there, which I don't really notice. They just are put in there.
Fixed it in the mix.
Yeah, we did. But it was really fun to record at Sunset Sound. I remember they had a pinball machine in the lounge. I remember enjoying watching Rita Rita Coolidge playing pinball for about a half an hour, and then Hall and Oates were in some other part, and they'd be playing pinball, and you'd meet people like that. It was Bob Welch would come down, check it out. Moon Martin would come down. It was a very cool studio. I loved Sunset Sound. And that is the story of the tracks, the ones that made it to the record.
Well, now you mentioned Route 66 before. The TV show theme that Nelson Riddle did was the first track that you recorded, but it didn't make the album. So whatever happened to it? Was it released as a B-side perhaps, or?
Never, no, because we didn't write it. And I don't think there was an advantage to it. Nelson Riddle probably didn't need another royalty. But we always played it, at least when Jeff was in the band, as our opening number, because it's just crazy. I mean, I don't know if you'll be able to hear it, but I won't play the whole thing, but I can play you. We played at the Catalina in San Diego. It was a motel that had a place where they'd have bands, and BBC would come there from England and tape it, video it. And soon after we finished the record, we went and played down there. Let me see if I can bring this up. I've got a decent speaker, so let's give this a shot.
All right. Well, meanwhile, you recorded at Sunset Sound. Why didn't you record at Capitol? I mean, Capitol had a brand new Neve board in Studio B and the big Studio A for large sessions, large groups.
Yeah.
So it was one of Carter's favorite rooms. I know he worked with Bob Welch in Studio B, and Punch Andrews was very fond of working with Bob Seger in Studio B. Just curious why Sunset Sound and not Capitol?
The only thing I can think of is that if you're signed to Capitol and you're recording an album for Capitol, and all the executives have to do is take an elevator down there and watch you and be there, it's never an advantage because they're not musicians. And Carter, who's been around the block a few times, had worked at Sunset Sound, and you can't just show up at Sunset Sound. But if you're an A&R guy at Capitol, of course you can show up. You're in the building already.
Yes.
Now we did record there in the next album, Careful, because it was a good studio. Obviously, they had very sized rooms, but that's legendary is the right word for that place. I loved recording there. You know, Frank Sinatra sessions, Beach Boys sessions. It's like you just know the walls, the vibrations that hit those walls. That's just the history of pop music, a lot of it right there.
Absolutely. Well, when I worked on the 9th floor in 77 to 80, my favorite part of the day was the beginning and the end of the day, because I'd stop for a couple of minutes and see what was going on in the studio on the way up to the 9th floor. And then on the way out of the building, I'd stop and hang out with Wally Troggett or talk to the engineers or see what session I could hang out at. And so I totally get why Carter got the band out of the building, away from the tower, to give them some creative space and to keep all of the label people out of their faces. That was probably a really smart move.
Yeah, I guess it was. I wouldn't know it otherwise. They also had the greatest. Capitol had the best reverb chamber in LA, and it was literally a chamber. It was under the basement of Capitol, under the parking lot, I guess.
Parking lot, right.
Yeah. And it was essentially a room with tile, maybe 10 feet by whatever, just this room. And it had a voice of the theater speaker at one end. What is a Altec Lansing, had a horn, and it's very high end. Then about 8 feet away, it had this big fat RCA cucumber mic, the ones that everybody wants. And so you would send a sound down there, whatever it was, guitar, vocal, and just the delay from it going from one side of, out of the speaker into this microphone and then back to the board. It was so clean that Capitol would lease that reverb to other studios with a telephone line. You could hook up to use that, which is hilarious because think of how many reverb chambers there are in LA, but that was the one. And I went in there once. They had a submarine kind of door. You had to undo it. And it had a rubber seal, and you go in. And you go, wow, this is where all those Beach Boys harmonies, or many of them, came out of.
Yeah, it's like going into a hatch on a ship almost. Yeah,
it was exactly that. It was like a submarine. It wasn't a door. It was like a hatch that sealed because they didn't want any leakage.
Well, Les Paul famously was, had his fingerprints on that that design.
Ah,
So those echo chambers. Now, Sunset Sound also had an echo setup. I think it was plates in a back room or something in the broom closet or some crazy setup, but it was good, but it wasn't quite as excellent as the Capitol echo chambers and reverb setup was.
no. And the reason Sunset didn't have a sound is because when you went in there, there wasn't this whole bunch of screwed into the wall audio gear, limiters and compressors and digital delays, and you had to rent everything piecemeal, like a la carte if you went to a restaurant. So
Yes.
it was when you went there, they had the board and they had the deck, the tape deck, and I guess some basic stuff, but they didn't have this big array. So you would rent them by the day or something somewhere else. So it really was like a blank piece of paper place. That's why bands like the Doobie Brothers can cut minute by minute there. I think, fact check me on that, but I know they recorded there, and so did Van Halen, and so did we, and so did Hall and Oates, and it didn't have a characteristic sound like people would want the Stax record sound in Memphis. It was a great place to record. I loved going there. We recorded Careful there as well.
Yep. Well, we've got about 2.5 minutes left. I wanted to just take a look back, a pull back here from the standpoint of decades, and the fact that you're playing still 5 songs from the first album in your live sets today, I think is quite a statement about the lasting quality of this particular record and these particular songs.
Yes. Sometimes we play 6. I just went through it. We play Total Control, Closets and Bullets, Atomic Cafe, Celia, Dressing Up and Counting. So, well, this is the thing where when you make your first album, it's a lifetime of songs. In this case, most of them being Martha's.
Right.
Well, the vast majority. The second album, the so-called sophomore album, that's the one where you got to come up with something because you put out your first record and toured, and unless you just happen to have 100 songs sitting in a closet, you got to come up with new material. So these were songs that Martha had obviously put a lot of thought and time into. And
they were well curated over the years.
Yeah, they were.
By the time you got them into the studio.
And also this got a lot of flack from some people that say, I hear you guys play live, and like that first album is so sterile and it's so cold and this doesn't sound like you guys live. And I go, well, okay, it doesn't, but it didn't have the trendy sounds of the month when we recorded it. It didn't have a gated reverb or something on the snare. It didn't have crazy brand new electronic devices that would sound dated 5 years later.
Or synth drums or something like that.
Yeah, and Jeff's guitar tone, if you want to hear a guitar player go through a whole bunch of tones, just listen to this record. All you had to do is put a mic in front of the amp because he's a tone meister, and it didn't require that much. It just required clean recording, and Warren Dewey was a real fanatic at clean recording. So
very good.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, on that note, let's wrap it up. Marty, thanks very much again for spending some time with us and filling us in on the details behind the first Motels album. We'll catch you on the next one.
You know it. Thanks for talking to me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.